What happens when America's sweetheart meets daytime television's most ruthless panel? You won't believe what unfolds when Jennifer Aniston sits down with the View hosts for what was supposed to be a routine promotional interview. This explosive confrontation will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about Hollywood's power dynamics and the dark side of daytime TV. Before we get into this incredible story, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below, because you're not going to believe what unfolds. When these seasoned talk show veterans decide to turn their guest into their prey, the studio lights blazed with their usual intensity as Jennifer Aniston walked onto the View set, her trademark smile masking what would soon become one of the most uncomfortable television moments in recent memory. She had come to promote her latest project, expecting the typical softball questions about her career, her personal life, and maybe some light banter about Friends nostalgia. What she got instead was an ambush that would expose the ugly underbelly of daytime television politics. The tension was palpable from the moment she sat down. The hosts exchanged knowing glances, their expressions betraying a coordinated effort that Jennifer hadn't anticipated. Joy Behar leaned forward with that predatory smile she reserves for moments when she senses weakness, while Whoopi Goldberg's usually warm demeanor had been replaced by something colder, more calculating. Sarah Haynes fidgeted with her notes, clearly uncomfortable with what was about to unfold, but unwilling to break ranks with her co-hosts. "Jennifer, welcome back to The View," Whoopi began, her voice carrying an edge that immediately set the tone. "We're so glad you could join us, especially given some of the interesting developments in your personal life lately." Jennifer's smile faltered slightly, her media-trained instincts kicking in as she sensed the shift in atmosphere. "Thank you for having me. I'm excited to talk about the new season and what we have coming up for viewers." But Joy wasn't about to let her redirect the conversation so easily. "Well, before we get to that, I think our audience is really curious about something else entirely. There's been a lot of speculation about your relationship choices, and frankly, some people are questioning whether you're just collecting younger men as some kind of ego boost." The studio audience fell silent, the cameramen adjusting their angles to capture Jennifer's reaction. Her publicist, standing just off camera, looked horrified, frantically making cutting motions with her hands that the production team deliberately ignored. "I'm sorry, what?" Jennifer asked, her voice barely above a whisper as she processed the unexpected attack. Sunny Hostin jumped in, her legal background evident in the way she structured her assault. "What Joy is trying to say is that there's a pattern here, Jennifer. Older successful woman, younger attractive men. And it seems like you're playing into some pretty problematic stereotypes about aging women in Hollywood desperately clinging to their youth." Jennifer's hands gripped the arms of her chair, her knuckles whitening as she tried to maintain her composure. "I think there's been some misunderstanding here. I came on the show to talk about my work, not to be psychoanalyzed about my personal relationships." "But isn't that exactly the problem?" Ana Navarro interjected, her voice dripping with false concern. "You want to promote your projects, make your money, but you don't want to address the elephant in the room. You're a role model to millions of women, and some would say you're sending the wrong message about how women should age gracefully." The attack was coordinated, methodical, and brutal. Each host took their turn, building on the previous assault while Jennifer sat there, increasingly isolated and vulnerable. The woman who had conquered Hollywood, who had survived one of the most public divorces in entertainment history, was being systematically torn down by women who were supposed to be her peers. "I don't understand where this is coming from," Jennifer said, her voice shaking slightly as she fought to maintain her professional demeanor. "I've always been private about my personal life, and I don't think it's fair to make assumptions about my choices or motivations." Whoopi leaned back in her chair, a satisfied smirk playing across her features. "Fair? Honey, you've been in this business long enough to know that fair doesn't enter into it. You put yourself out there. You open yourself up to scrutiny. That's the deal." "But this isn't scrutiny," Jennifer shot back, finding a spark of her fighting spirit. "This feels like an attack. I came here as your guest, and you're treating me like I'm on trial for something I haven't even done." Joy's laugh was sharp and dismissive. "Oh, please, don't play the victim card. You're one of the highest-paid actresses in Hollywood. You've got more money than most people could spend in a lifetime, and you want us to feel sorry for you because we're asking tough questions." The audience began to murmur, some sensing that the hosts had crossed a line, others caught up in the drama unfolding before them. Jennifer looked around the table, searching for an ally, for anyone who might throw her a lifeline. But Sarah Haynes looked away, unable to meet her eyes, while the other hosts continued their relentless assault. You know what I think? Sunny continued, her voice taking on a prosecutorial tone. I think you're so used to being America's sweetheart, so used to everyone telling you what you want to hear, that you can't handle it when people ask you real questions about your real choices. Jennifer's breathing became shallow, her chest rising and falling rapidly as the walls seemed to close in around her. This wasn't an interview anymore. It was a public execution, and she was the guest of honor at her own demise. I think what my colleagues are trying to say, Anna added with false diplomacy, is that when you're in the public eye, especially at your level, every choice you make sends a message. And some of those messages might not be the ones you intend to send. The trap was complete. No matter how Jennifer responded, she would be walking deeper into the minefield they had carefully constructed around her. If she defended her personal choices, she would be seen as defensive and guilty. If she remained silent, she would appear to accept their characterization of her as a desperate aging actress clinging to inappropriate relationships. But what the hosts hadn't anticipated was the steel that lay beneath Jennifer's carefully cultivated public persona. The same strength that had carried her through the collapse of her marriage in the tabloid spotlight, the same resilience that had built her into one of Hollywood's most bankable stars, began to surface as she realized that diplomacy and professionalism were going to save her from this orchestrated humiliation. The cameras continued to roll, capturing every micro-expression, every moment of vulnerability that the hosts were so expertly extracting from their guest. But something was shifting in Jennifer's demeanor, a hardening that the experienced talk show hosts should have recognized as a warning sign. Instead, they pressed forward with their attack, mistaking her momentary silence for capitulation, unaware that they were about to push America's sweetheart past her breaking point and trigger an explosion that would overshadow anything The View had ever broadcast before. What happened next would become the talk of social media within minutes. But it started with Joy Behar's most calculated move yet. She pulled out her phone, pretending to scroll through something before looking up with that smug expression that had become her trademark. You know, Jennifer, I was just looking at some photos from last week's premiere, and I have to ask, don't you think it's a little embarrassing to be photographed hanging all over someone who could literally be your son? Joy's voice dripped, with mock concern as she held up her phone toward the cameras. The question hit Jennifer like a physical blow. Her face flushed crimson, and for the first time since sitting down, her carefully maintained composure began to crack visibly. The audience gasped audibly, sensing that the hosts had just crossed a line that even daytime television rarely breached. Excuse me. Jennifer's voice was barely controlled, each word measured and dangerous, but Whoopi wasn't finished. She leaned forward, her voice taking on that condescending tone she reserved for guests she wanted to destroy. Look, honey, we're all adults here. We've all been around the block. But when you're constantly parading around with men half your age, people are going to talk. And maybe it's time someone said what everyone else is thinking. Sarah Haynes shifted uncomfortably in her seat, finally finding her voice, but only to pile on. I think what Whoopi means is that as women, we have to be careful about the image we project, especially successful women like yourself. There's already so much ageism in Hollywood, and when we play into certain stereotypes, stop. Jennifer's voice cut through Sarah's rambling justification like a knife. The single word carried such force that it actually made the seasoned talk show host pause mid-sentence. Just stop right there. The studio fell deadly quiet. Even the production crew seemed to hold their breath as they realized they were witnessing something unprecedented. Jennifer Aniston, America's sweetheart, the woman who had smiled through decades of tabloid scrutiny and public humiliation, was finally about to fight back. Who do you think you are? Jennifer's voice was rising now, her media training abandoned, as raw emotion took over. Who gave you the right to sit there and dissect my personal life like I'm some kind of specimen under a microscope? Ana Navarro tried to jump in with damage control. Jennifer, we're just having a conversation about no. Jennifer's hand slammed down on the table, causing the coffee mugs to rattle and sending a shock wave through the studio. This isn't a conversation. This is an ambush. This is 4 women ganging up on me for what? For ratings? For clicks? 4. The sick pleasure of tearing down another woman. Sunny Hostin, her legal background making her think she could control the narrative, leaned forward with false calm. I think you're overreacting, Jennifer. These are legitimate questions about choices that affect how women are perceived and legitimate. Jennifer's laugh was bitter and harsh. Legitimate would be asking me about my work, my charity efforts, my upcoming projects. This is character assassination disguised as journalism, and you all know it. The hosts exchanged glances, suddenly, realizing that their carefully orchestrated attack was backfiring spectacularly. But instead of backing down, Joy doubled down with the cruelty that had made her famous. Listen, sweetheart, if you can't handle the heat, maybe you shouldn't have stepped into the kitchen. You're a public figure. Your personal life is fair game, especially when you're making choices that, frankly, a lot of women find problematic. That was the moment everything changed. Jennifer stood up slowly, her chair scraping against the floor with a sound that seemed to echo through the stunned silence of the studio. When she spoke, her voice was low, controlled, and absolutely lethal. You want to know what's problematic? For successful women sitting at a table, using their platform to shame another woman for living her life on her own terms. You want to know what's embarrassing? The fact that you've turned what should be a supportive space for women into a gladiator arena where you tear each other apart for entertainment. Whoopi tried to regain control, her voice rising to match Jennifer's intensity. Now hold on just a minute. We're not tearing anyone apart. We're asking questions that our audience wants answers to. Your audience? Jennifer's voice cracked with emotion and rage. Or your producers? Because I'm pretty sure your audience tuned in to hear about my new show, not to watch you publicly humiliate me about my dating life. The cameras were capturing every moment, every raw emotion playing across Jennifer's face as 20 years of pent-up frustration with the media's treatment of her personal life came pouring out. This wasn't the polished, diplomatic Jennifer Aniston that the public was used to seeing. This was a woman who had finally reached her breaking point. Sarah Haynes made one last desperate attempt to salvage the situation. Jennifer, I think there's been a misunderstanding. We're all women here. We're all on the same side the same side. Jennifer's voice rose to near shouting levels. You think we're on the same side? You just spent the last 15 minutes calling me desperate, embarrassing, and problematic, and now you want to pretend we're allies. Anna tried to interject with her politician's instinct for damage control. I think if we could all just take a breath and no more breathing. Jennifer exploded, her voice echoing through the studio. No more diplomatic responses. No more taking the high road while you drag me through the mud. I'm done pretending this is normal, that this is okay, that this is just part of the job. The audience was completely silent now, some filming with their phones despite security's attempts to stop them. This was the kind of television moment that would be replayed endlessly on social media, dissected by every entertainment show, and remembered long after everyone had forgotten what Jennifer had actually come to promote. Joy, sensing that they had lost complete control of the situation, made one final, devastating mistake. You know what, Jennifer? Maybe if you spent less time worrying about what 25-year-olds think of you and more time acting your age, we wouldn't be having this conversation. The words hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Jennifer's face went completely white, then flushed deep red as the full impact of the insult hit her. For a moment, she seemed too shocked to speak, too stunned by the sheer cruelty of the attack to formulate a response. But when she finally found her voice, it was with a calm that was somehow more terrifying than her earlier anger. You know what, Joy? You're absolutely right. I should act my age. And at my age, I'm old enough to know when I'm being disrespected, when I'm being used, and when it's time to walk away from people who mistake cruelty for cleverness. The tension in the studio was now suffocating. Production assistants were frantically signaling to the director, the hosts were realizing they had gone too far, and Jennifer was standing at the precipice of a decision that would define not just this interview, but potentially her entire relationship with daytime television going forward. What happened next would be the moment that transformed a routine promotional appearance into television history, as America's sweetheart prepared to show the world that even the nicest people have their limits. Jennifer took a deep breath, her hands trembling slightly as she reached for her purse. The simple action sent a ripple of panic through the production team, who realized they were about to lose complete control of their carefully orchestrated show. The director was frantically gesturing from behind the cameras, but it was too late to stop what was already in motion. "You know what?" Jennifer said, her voice now steady with a resolve that made everyone in the studio hold their breath. "I've spent my entire career being polite, being professional, being the good sport who takes whatever garbage people want to throw at me with a smile. But I'm done with that version of myself." She stood up fully now, her chair rolling back as she gathered her belongings with deliberate, measured movements. The hosts sat frozen, suddenly realizing that their victim was about to become their victor in the most public way possible. Whoopi tried one last desperate attempt at damage control. "Jennifer, let's not do anything hasty here. We're all professionals. We can work this out. Professionals?" Jennifer's laugh was sharp and incredulous. "You call this professional? You ambushed me. You attacked my personal life. You made cruel jokes about my age. And now you want to talk about professionalism?" She turned to face the cameras directly, addressing the audience with an intensity that made even the seasoned camera operators adjust their focus. "I want everyone watching at home to see what just happened here. I came on this show to talk about my work, to connect with viewers, to share something positive. Instead, these women decided to use their platform to tear me down for their own entertainment." Ana Navarro, her political instincts kicking in, tried to salvage the situation. "I think there's been a miscommunication here. We were just trying to have an honest conversation about honest." Jennifer whirled around to face her, her eyes blazing with fury that made Ana shrink back in her chair. "There was nothing honest about this. This was a coordinated attack designed to humiliate me, and you all know it. You came in here with your questions already planned, your narrative already decided, and you didn't care about my feelings, my dignity, or my humanity." Sunny Hostin, still trying to maintain her lawyer's composure, made the mistake of speaking up. "I think you're being overly dramatic, Jennifer. We're just doing our jobs as journalists. Journalists?" Jennifer's voice rose to a level that made everyone in the studio flinch. "You're not journalists. You're bullies with microphones. You're mean girls who never grew up, who think having a platform gives you the right to destroy people for fun." The audience was completely silent now, some covering their mouths in shock, others openly staring at the unprecedented meltdown happening before their eyes. Security guards had moved closer to the set, unsure whether they should intervene or simply document what was clearly going to be a viral moment. Joy Behar, her face red with anger and embarrassment, made the fatal mistake of trying to get the last word. "Well, if you can't handle the questions, maybe you shouldn't have come on the show." That was it. The final straw that broke whatever remained of Jennifer's restraint. "Handle the questions." Jennifer's voice dropped to a dangerous whisper that somehow carried more menace than her earlier shouting. "I've handled questions about my marriages, my divorces, my fertility struggles, my career choices, my body, my age, my relationships for over 20 years. I've handled questions that would make grown men cry. But what I won't handle is sitting here while 4 bitter women project their own insecurities onto me." She picked up her purse and slung it over her shoulder with a decisive motion that made it clear she was done with diplomacy forever. "You want to know what's really sad? You had one of the most successful actresses in Hollywood sitting at your table, willing to talk about her work, her experiences, her journey. And you threw it all away because you thought it would be more fun to be cruel." Sarah Haynes, tears actually visible in her eyes now, tried to make one last appeal. "Jennifer, please, we never meant for this to go this far. But it did go this far." Jennifer cut her off with ice-cold precision. "It went this far because you chose to make it go this far. Every single one of you had multiple opportunities to pull back, to show some basic human decency, to remember that I'm a person, not a punching bag for your entertainment." She turned to face the audience one final time, her voice carrying a strength and dignity that made her previous vulnerability seem like a distant memory. "To everyone watching at home, I want you to remember this moment. Remember what it looks like when successful women use their power to tear down other women. Remember what it sounds like when people mistake cruelty for courage, when they confuse bullying with bravery." Whoopi made one final, desperate attempt to maintain control. "Jennifer, you're making a mistake here. Walking out isn't going to solve anything dash. Walking out is the only thing that will solve this. Jennifer replied with absolute certainty. Because every second I stay here, every second I participate in this circus, I'm enabling this behavior. I'm telling you that it's okay to treat people this way, and it's not okay. She began walking toward the exit, her heels clicking against the studio floor with a rhythm that sounded like a countdown to the end of the host's careers. The cameras followed her every step, capturing the moment when America's sweetheart finally decided she didn't need to be sweet to people who were rotten to their core. You know what the real tragedy is? Jennifer called back over her shoulder without slowing her pace. You could have had a great show today. You could have talked about women supporting women, about overcoming challenges in Hollywood, about the importance of kindness in a cruel world. Instead, you chose to be part of the cruelty. Joy, her face now purple with rage and humiliation, shouted after her retreating figure. You think you're too good for this show? You think you're better than us? Jennifer stopped walking and turned around one final time, her expression calm and resolute. I don't think I'm better than you. I know I'm better than this. And that's the difference between us. Ana Navarro made one last pathetic attempt at salvaging the situation. Jennifer, we're sorry if you felt attacked. That wasn't our intention, dash. Your intention doesn't matter. Jennifer replied with finality. Your impact does. And your impact today was to show the world exactly who you really are when you think the cameras are rolling in your favor. She reached the exit and paused for just a moment, looking back at the four women who had tried to destroy her and instead had destroyed themselves. Good luck explaining this to your audience. Good luck explaining why you thought it was acceptable to treat a guest this way. Good luck explaining why you chose to be bullies instead of broadcasters. With that, she pushed through the studio doors and disappeared from view, leaving behind a stunned silence that seemed to stretch on forever. The hosts sat at their table, suddenly aware that they had just participated in their own professional suicide, broadcast live to millions of viewers who had just watched them reveal their true colors. The cameras continued rolling for several more seconds, capturing the shocked faces of the hosts, the uncomfortable shifting of the audience, and the general sense that something irreversible had just happened. Then, finally, someone in the control room had the sense to cut to commercial, but it was too late. The damage was done, the moment was captured, and Jennifer Aniston had just reminded the world that sometimes the kindest people make the most devastating enemies when they finally decide to stop being kind to those who don't deserve it. America's sweetheart had shown her teeth, and the bite was every bit as memorable as the smile had ever been.